Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The families of 3 women believed to be the victims of an alleged serial killer will be allowed into a Winnipeg landfill to hold a traditional ceremony tonight. A group of protesters has been manning an encampment at the Brady Road landfill to keep pressure on the city to search for the women. Officials agreed to escort family members and 2 elders to the area of the Brady landfill where the remains of Rebecca Contois were recovered in June. Protesters believe the remains of many other missing women could be at Brady and at a second site, the Prairie Green landfill. Melissa Normand, the cousin of one of the victims, says a spirit dish will be offered to aid the women's journeys to the spirit world.
I want the area completely blessed, prayer said upon, smudge that whole area. And, and for the rest of us, it's going to be important for us to also do that. So, and we'll go from there. So what it's all going to entail, I'm not too certain myself. But again, that'll be up to the elder in what she sees fit.
Scholar and elder Dan Paul wrote one of the first history books in Canada from a Mi'kmaq point of view. And he started a conversation about Edward Cornwallis, the founder of Halifax, who put a bounty on Mi'kmaq scalps. Paul fought for the renaming of landmarks bearing the Cornwallis name and won. But he is now in another fight, this time against cancer. CTV's Heidi Petrachik has more.
This is the 3rd edition.
At 84 years old, it seems nothing has ever stopped Daniel Paul, the Mi'kmaq elder and author, always working to create change for First Nations.
It had to be incremental. I had to educate the population first.
Paul recently went public with his latest cancer diagnosis, incurable liver cancer, and given 3 to 6 months to live by doctors. His latest round of chemo, he says, went well.
Nothing to fear. I fully intend to live until I die. I don't intend to live a life of the living dead waiting for it.
Raised in poverty on the Indian Brook Reserve, Paul experienced racism early on and always wanted to fight it.
We had nothing to eat for 3 days, and Mom asked the agent for some assistance, and he made her beg and cry, and I said to myself, when I grow up, no bastard like you is going to do that to me. And I can guarantee you no bastard like him ever did.
Expelled from Indian Day School at 14 for scoring 100 on a math exam, he worked as a laborer on both sides of the border, then returned to Nova Scotia to complete his education as a bookkeeper. His 1962 college report card still tucked away in his files.
English 72.5.
This fall, Paul released an updated edition of his seminal work, a history book called We Were Not the Savages. First published in 1993, it highlights the historic and systemic racism faced by Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia and exposed Edward Cornwallis's 1749 bounty on Mi'kmaq scalps.
What we had up until the point of We Were Not the Savages being published was fairy tales in many ways.
Rather than being confrontational, we'll sit down, we'll negotiate.
A life of public advocacy has followed, fighting for Mi'kmaq rights and the removal of Cornwallis from public landmarks and place names.
He was one of the first ones to start writing about the true history.
Canada's first Mi'kmaq member of Parliament learned about Paul in a university course. Now friends and fellow advocates, Jaime Batiste was there when they visited the park where a statue of Edward Cornwallis was removed by the city in 2018.
People will go after him personally and people question his findings and things like that, but he's never shied away from telling the truth about Nova Scotia's history.
Canadians have opened up their minds and want to learn more real history.
Paul says Canada has come a long way, but there's still work to do. No matter what comes next, his place in history is certain. Heidi Petrachik, CTV News, Halifax.
And we want to hear what you think about the stories you've seen so far tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca, or you can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. In Saskatchewan, it's been a year of big news stories, from the search for Frank Young to the mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation. The world focused on Saskatchewan during international news coverage. Leanne Sanders brings us Saskatchewan's year in review.
Saskatchewan had its share of stories of grief and trauma in 2022. In February, 54 potential unmarked graves were found on the Kisikoos First Nation in eastern Saskatchewan with the help of ground-penetrating radar. Ted Cusons is a survivor and former chief. He says the findings back up what survivors in the community have always said about unmarked graves.
Our chief has recognized that healing is not a political event. The work that has been done within our community, it's not politics. It's a human issue.
In April, the search for 5-year-old Frank Young of the Red Earth Cree Nation started. He went missing on April 19th. He was found deceased in July, not far from where he was last seen. Later on in July, Dawn Walker, an author and longtime senior employee of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, went missing from Saskatoon with her son. FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron pleaded for help.
With her communication skills, her personality and her attitude, as always, it was a daily thing to hear from her or to give her a call. So everyone knew something was wrong when we didn't hear from her.
After 15 days, Walker and her son were found in Oregon, and she was charged in Canada and the U.S. with multiple offenses, from parental abduction to forging a passport to get into the States. Those cases are still before the courts. In early September, tragedy struck the James Smith Cree Nation and the nearby village of Weldon. On September 14th, 11 people died and 18 others were injured after a mass stabbing took place at the hands of 32-year-old Miles Sanderson. The community banded together to grieve. Daryl Burns' sister Gloria was one of the victims. He embraces the partner of Jamie and Sanderson.
Her husband was one of the accused. Her husband is accused of killing my sister. Our family is here to forgive. This woman shouldn't have to bear that kind of guilt and shame and responsibility.
Her husband, Damian Sanderson, and his brother Miles were the two most wanted men in Canada after the stabbings. But Damian's body was discovered on September 5th, a victim of his brother, according to the RCMP. In late September, Megan Gallagher's remains were found on the banks of the Saskatchewan River near St. Louis, 2 years after her disappearance from Saskatoon. 9 people are facing a bevy of charges, including murder, forcible confinement, and indignity to human remains in connection to her death. Those cases are making their way through the courts. Soon after the James Smith stabbings, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came out to the community with a plan to heal from the attacks.
All members of our communities should have access to the type of support they need. Today, we're taking action to improve access to care for the people of James Smith Cree Nation. We'll invest $40 million over 6 years to build a new wellness centre here in the community and to repurpose the existing Saquatamo Lodge to address immediate needs.
He then pledged another $20 million for safety projects on First Nations across Canada. As part of reconciliation, an Alberta rancher and 2 Christian charities are giving bison back to First Nations people. Tear Fund Canada and the Loco-Koa Samoan Youth Ministry in Saskatchewan donated 24 to the Cody First Nation. The Pepikasis and Sagame First Nation were also gifted the bison. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
All right, it's time to step aside for a short break. Still ahead, the Arctic Winter Games are almost upon us. And from the UN Declaration on Indigenous Rights to salmon fish farms to stolen totem poles. These are some of the stories from British Columbia that APTN's Lee Wilson will be covering in the weeks ahead. Here's a look.
It could have a major impact on land. 2023 all follow the progress of BC's commitment to implement the UN Declaration with an action plan. One of the main goals is to respect and uphold the title and rights of Indigenous people in the province. It could have a major impact on land disputes. The federal government plans to phase out salmon farms on BC's coast by 2025. A transition plan is expected to be announced next year, and I'll track the progress of the return of the Nisga'a Nation's totem pole from the Museum of Scotland. It was taken from their community nearly 100 years ago. These stories are coming next year on APTN National News.
Welcome back to APTN National News. When APTN Investigates reported from New Hulk territory last month, community leaders were worried about gold mining. A company called Juggernaut Exploration has been doing drilling near Bellacoola, BC. But now they're telling the New Hulk people they're not coming back. And APTN Investigates reporter Christopher Reed joined us this week to explain. Chris, thanks for being here. When you were in New Hulk territory in October, leadership was getting ready to put up totem poles, right? So can you tell us what's going on now?
Well, they're still carving those poles to install as a warning for companies like Juggernaut. But what's changed is Juggernaut says it's done in the area. They have been studying the geology in the area near Bellacoola, and until their latest report, they had been saying that the mountains nearby looked like they had an economically promising amount of gold in the rock. But just a few days ago, Juggernaut said they have left the Bellacoola area, which is the heart of New Hulk territory, and they say they have left permanently.
Okay, so who did Juggernaut tell this to?
Well, in the Investigates episode, Reawakening the Mountains, we met Nisga'a, who is also known as Jacinda Mack. She is the New Hulk woman who delivered the so-called eviction notice to Juggernaut workers on behalf of New Hulk leaders in 2021. And Nisga'a recorded a telephone conversation with Juggernaut's CEO, Dan Stewart, a few days ago, shortly after Juggernaut's annual general meeting. And in that conversation, which I've heard, Stewart tells Nisga'a that Juggernaut will not be coming back, saying that their latest reports indicate that the amounts of gold being found in peaks around Bellacoola are uneconomic.
Well, given what you had just said, what is Juggernaut Exploration telling its investors about this?
Well, a December 13th release on their website says their drilling near Bellacoola in 2022 didn't duplicate the grades and widths of gold mineralization found in 2021. So they say they need additional data, compilation, and interpretation to understand the remaining gold potential in the area. So they haven't explicitly indicated on their website that they are done with Bellacoola. We've reached out to Juggernaut on this, but we haven't heard back.
And lastly here, Chris, so what is the reaction in New Hulk territory?
Well, the news has been spread on the community radio station, and according to Nisga'a, the response she's hearing is excitement, but there's no official response from the community leadership yet. And Nisga'a herself is cautious, taking a wait-and-see approach on this. She told me that she finds it noteworthy that Dan Stewart's decision to pull out of Bellacoola is, according to him, about economics and not so much about the community wanting them out to protect their sacred mountains, including Mount Pootlas, which is where it's believed the first New Hulk people descended onto from the heavens.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for this update. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, excitement is brewing across the north with a little over a month left before the athletes compete in the beloved Arctic Winter Games. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs sat in on some of the action during tryouts. Here's that story.
Adrena McDonald is hitting the ice, hopeful of making it to 2023's Arctic Winter Games.
I was very nervous just because there were a couple of college students there, and I'm 14 years old, so it was kind of intimidating, and they were very good. So that was scary, but it was a cool opportunity to get to play with older people.
And her hard work is paying off. She's just received word that she'll be representing Team Northwest Territories under-20 women's hockey team.
So this is what my parents and my grandparents ring when someone gets a goal. It's the Gwich'in Tribal Council. I was thinking of bringing my slippers, my mucklucks, to the games. Also good to represent the Tetliquichin.
Trials were held this month with more than 750 athletes from across the territory showcasing their skills in several sports, like hockey, speed skating, and Dene Games.
Having the opportunity just to be here and just think it's cool because thinking back in the 1970s when they first started, to see how different it changed and they added women to the games.
Sheila Hendrick was part of the first NWT Women's Hand Games team and hopes to make it here.
I get nervous sometimes, but I just put my mind to the game.
Just how amazing how the culture is. Just cool.
Back at the rink, the competition for hockey was fierce, with several communities sending players for tryouts. The men's and women's team were whittled down to the final 17 players. But like so many other female Indigenous athletes north of 60, McDonald is rising to the challenge. She's been playing hockey since grade 1 and is also competing for Team NWT at Canada Winter Games.
I've played in house league every single year. Yeah, there were a couple years where I was the only girl, and I started hockey as the only girl.
Do you feel like you have to ever try harder, or do you ever?
Yeah, I do. I feel like there's a lot of pressure that goes on me, but I also have lots of supporters, especially all the hockey moms in the stands.
The games will take place for the first time since 2019, with Fort McMurray hosting January 29th to February 4th. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
All right, it's time for one more break, but first, it's been several decades since the federal government began dismantling a former casket band in the Yukon, but its people are refusing to fade into the background. Here's a look at what our reporter Sarah Connors is working on for the new year.
And Pelly Banks is here, right in here.
Desloa Smith is the Crow Clan leader of the Pelly Banks people, a people who were erased by the federal government. In 1956, the Department of Indian Affairs amalgamated the Pelly Banks band with another, bypassing formal amalgamation rules in the process. Now, its former members and their descendants want the federal government to reinstate the Pelly Banks band as their own First Nation.
They did us wrong, so it's up to them to correct what they did to us, to our people.
That's coming soon on APTN National News.
Welcome back to APTN National News. It's time now for our photo of the day. Pictured here are some earrings made by Inuk 360. These are made from caribou hide and antler bone and then treated with some beadwork. Inuk says her brother helps gather the supplies when he's out hunting on the land. Those are gorgeous earrings. Thanks for all the photos you have shared with us this year, and we have enjoyed sharing them with all of our viewers across Turtle Island. We hope you stay safe and warm, surrounded by loved ones this holiday season. And until next year, you can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start on the East Coast, 3 degrees in Charlottetown and 6 in Halifax. Minus 12 in Clear and Happy Valley Goose Bay, and minus 17 in Coujawak. Minus 4 in Quebec City, and minus 3 in snow in Montreal. Minus 7 and snow in Toronto, and minus 9 in Sault Ste. Marie. Minus 3 degrees in snow in Timmins, and minus 17 in Sioux Lookout. Minus 25 in Churchill, and minus 20 in Norway House. Minus 19 in Barons River, and minus 19 in Winnipeg. Minus 19 and a mix of sun and cloud in Regina, and minus 18 in Saskatoon. Snow and minus 19 in Buffalo Narrows, and minus 27 in Stony Rapids. As we move west, snow and minus 24 in Fort Chipewyan, and minus 25 in Peace River. Snow and minus 15 in Edmonton, and 0 in Calgary. More snow is on the way in Vancouver in 0 degrees, and 0 in snow in Campbell River. Minus 1 in Prince Rupert, and minus 30 in Fort Nelson. Snow and minus 33 in Beaver Creek and minus 40 in Dawson. Minus 31 in Norman Wells and minus 30 in Yellowknife. Minus 28 in Clear in Inuvik and minus 34 in Colville Lake. Minus 23 in Snow and Baker Lake and minus 26 in Arviat. Minus 20 in Glulik and Clear and minus 14 in Pangnirtung. Well, Canadians from coast to coast are bracing for more messy winter weather, with nearly every province facing weather warnings today. Environment Canada has issued warnings right across the country. BC will see heavy snowfall mixed with freezing rain in some areas. The prairies are facing a frightening wind chill, and a monster storm is bearing down on eastern Canada. And in Toronto, cleanup crews are on standby as major winter storm bears down on the city. Toronto is expected to see a mix of rain and snow, followed by plummeting temperatures that could result in flash freezing conditions. The city says cleanup equipment and crews are already located in strategic positions targeting major roadways, local roads, and sidewalks. Toronto's Director of Maintenance and Operations says the storm cleanup will likely take days.
This is going to be a multi-day, multi-round event. If we do receive the anticipated accumulations of possibly 10 to 15 centimeters, we're looking at multiple rounds or multiple passes in order to make the roads safe and passable. And that's our objective. Our objective is to ensure that the infrastructure, whether it be a road, bicycle lane, or a sidewalk, is safe for all users.
A bill to recognize January 4th as National Ribbon Skirt Day has received royal assent. The bill was put forward by Senator Mary Jane McCallum. 11-year-old Bella Kulak was shamed by an education assistant for wearing a ribbon skirt to formal day at her school in Saskatchewan 2 years ago. The EA told her a ribbon skirt is not formal attire. The incident sparked an international movement. Women from across Canada and the United States wore their ribbon skirts in solidarity with Bella. Now, every year on January the 4th, National Ribbon Skirt Day will bring awareness to the importance of Indigenous traditions in combating racism. All right, and that's all we have for you tonight on APTN National News. If you missed any of our stories or you want to catch up on anything you may have missed throughout the year, you can do so at aptnnews.ca. For all of us here, I want to wish you a happy holidays, and I will see you again in the new year. Thank you so much for joining us this year. Chimigwich, have a great night.